All right, people, welcome back to another episode of Talkin Lost. We're here to talk season 1, episode 5, entitled White Rabbit. So it's interesting, Luke, because even though the pilot gave us insight into Jack as the main character, this is the first episode where we start to get flashbacks into Jack's life. Obviously, the show is pretty much established itself as being one part set on the island and them trying to survive, and then one part a flashback, essentially origin story for each of these characters that we're starting to get to know throughout the course of the first season. And we got it with Kate, we got it with Locke, now we get it with our main character Jack. And if you ask me, this is probably one of the most emotionally poignant episodes of the entire show so far.
Absolutely, yeah. So far, he's just been Jack the Doctor, the de facto Jon Snow type leader. So just to find out more about him, and still, there's more to find out about him later in the season, I'm sure. So I'm excited to get into his character.
Yes, indeed. Most TV shows fall into the trap of, having their main character be not necessarily the least interesting one, but they always are surrounded by more interesting characters. And Lost, I'm happy to say, never fell into that trap. All of that and more on today's episode of Talkin Lost. All right, Luke. So, season 1, episode 5, White Rabbit. We are about 4 to 5 episodes into this show now, and man, it keeps getting better and better. I really have to say, just from my perspective, as far as this is the first time I've watched this show in about 5 years. I think I mentioned when we did the pilot that I had originally finished the show back in 2019. This has got to be my favorite stretch of the show. I just love how character focused this is. Like, it's kind of insane to me how you were mentioning that, again, every show feels the need to go so fast and dive immediately into the plot. But these episodes are really, really taking their time and getting you introduced to the characters and really, like, I feel like we understand these characters better than a majority of the shows that we have right now.
Yeah, it's just sort of building the archetypes, establishing everyone's roles, and then building the depth and the background information on them, which is, yeah, like just think about House of the Dragon. It's like, boom, everyone's here. You have to know everyone immediately.
Yeah.
Like this, and this is just like, okay, we have the time, we have the episode count to do this, and it's just a nice change of pace, just going back to an older show.
Not even just that, but also the fact that it's not like these are just like, essentially this is just like backstory for the sake of backstory's sake, which is also another easy trap that a lot of shows fall into. But it's the fact that they managed to make all these details eventually come back around, like they essentially spend the equivalent of 3 seasons giving you all this backstory on this character. And even when the show starts to get more plot focused and timey-wimey and sci-fi with the later seasons, it's still like it brings back all those character beats in order to like fully inform the character's choices and decisions as they eventually go up against more supernatural forces as time goes on. Right now, they're still kind of in survivalist mode. It's still kind of in that whole Survivor / Lord of the Flies situation-esque. But it's really interesting. And obviously, like I was talking before the show started, a lot of these shows fall into the easy trap of having the main character be the least interesting one. And this wasn't the case. We obviously talked about John Locke last season and how, hey, we saw the reasoning for his philosophy and why he believes in the island so much because of how well that twist was built up and established in Walkabout. The fact that he was revealed to have been paralyzed before the plane crashed, and it's this incredible juxtaposition between the rest of the characters, where this plane crash is the worst moment for a lot of these characters. I was actually reading an article yesterday about what Variety classified as the top 10 episodes of Lost, and they said something actually very poignant, which I didn't think Variety was still capable of, which is, or maybe it was Deadline, I don't remember. Anyways, the point being that for the rest of the survivors, the plane crash was one of the worst moments in their life, but for Locke, it was one of the best because it gave him back something that he had been robbed of. And that's a very, very subtle hint and clue at what this show is going to do going forward as far as how the island, I talked about this, this is something that Damon Lindelof loves to do. He focused very, very heavily on this in The Leftovers, and if you ask me, he did it better in The Leftovers, but the early seasons of Lost are really all about establishing that the island is there to like kind of fill a hole that's in each one of these characters. It's mentioned by the character of Jacob, who we don't meet for some time in the show, that the island is there because each one of these characters was missing something in the real world, some form of trauma, as we'll get into with each one of the characters. And this is the episode where we really start to get that from Jack. And I think it does a supremely good job with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It tells us something, but it also keeps some information from us so that we keep watching. We know that we find out that he went looking for his dad. His dad had died, so he had to go fly the plane from Australia to LA to arrange funerals, and that's when the plane crash obviously happened. But we don't know what caused that rift between them. So I'm guessing that will be the kind of hole that leaves that the island fills in for Jack throughout the
Yes.
series. And
Yes.
we already get some, my questions about the man in the suit have
Yes.
been answered. For once,
Yeah.
something was answered, but then another question was raised.
Well,
So
yeah, that's the thing is that I know everybody obviously gives the show shit for not answering any of the questions, but I disagree. I really have to disagree with that criticism only because if you're really watching, if you're really paying attention to every single bit, the show does answer all the questions. It just I think that my theory is that it didn't answer questions in the way that people wanted or were expecting because the show was never about being straightforward. But that's human nature. Human nature is not straightforward. Human nature doesn't have any easy answers. Things get messy. Things get emotional. Emotion clouds what might be better judgment. And
yeah,
the fact
I
that
just have to keep watching, and I'll
exactly
get at least get some answers, or at least a concept of an answer. You might.
yes, indeed. And like I said, we're still with the initial 14 survivors. We haven't even started to meet some of the additional players who will come in later seasons who end up becoming very major important players. I'm honestly I'm so excited for when you end up meeting Desmond and Ben, and then obviously once Charles Widmore gets to the island. But those are all names for a future day. Right now we're gonna stick with the initial 14. You already have enough names that you have to remember to begin with. So
Dude, I don't even call them by the names. I call it's Jack because I know that's an easy name to remember. Kate, Mary is there,
yes, Mary.
and
Or
then the Fire Lord Ozai is also there,
that's
and
right.
then just like yeah,
Yeah. Fun fact: Fire Lord Ozai actually originally had a voiceover in Legend of Korra, which is why he got the job. But come on, you know Locke now, though. That's another
I
one
do
that
know
you know.
Locke.
Yeah, that's another one. Like I said, well, eventually we'll get
I
you
call
used.
him Scarface though,
Ah,
because
okay.
on just when I forget.
We'll get you used to the initial names for sure. So, opening scene of White Rabbit: young Jack getting beat up by bullies. Cut to present. Jack is alerted by Charlie to one of the survivors who's drowning out in the water. Jack swims out, but he discovers that Boone's almost drowning. Boone tells him that it's someone else that's drowning. Jack gets him to shore, swims back out to try and save the drowning victim, and is unsuccessful. Roll credits. So, already the show is establishing that, like, yeah, Jack's whole thing is, even though he's reluctant right now, Jack does have the savior complex. And it's kind of funny to me how throughout the course of the episode, he's constantly telling everyone, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be the leader. I don't want everybody to keep looking to me. And Charlie and Hurley are both kind of like, well, who else are we gonna look to? There's no one else really here that like can step up. Like everyone is like kind of already assumed their roles kind of within the survivalist picture, and everyone's kind of instinctively looking to Jack as this medicine man, as this figure, this sage leader, someone who has this knowledge, this expertise that can allow them to survive. And I love that the juxtaposition of the flashbacks show that the reason why he has this savior complex is because he was constantly told by his dad, who we now know is the spectral figure in the suit that's been haunting him the last couple of episodes, constantly told him from a young age, you don't have what it takes. Very similar to how Locke was saying, don't tell me what I can't do in last episode. Obviously, Christian, which I don't think his name is ever mentioned, but Jack's father, Dr. Christian Shepard, played by John Terry, who we were introduced to in this episode, who, again, not a main character, but going to be a very important character going forward throughout the course of the show, is constantly reaffirming to his son that simply because, that simply because he's letting his emotion cloud his judgment and is trying to do the right thing, that means that he doesn't have what it takes to be a leader, which obviously couldn't be further from the truth as we continue to follow Jack throughout his journey. Obviously now that we've actually know who the man in the suit is, obviously after meeting Jack's dad, Christian, what do you think of him so far?
Yeah, we didn't even get that much of him. He just kind of stands there menacingly, and we don't really know what it is. Is he really hallucinating? Like the conclusions Locke brings to him, or he says like. I really enjoyed their conversation later on about like what it could be. We'll get to that in a bit, but yeah, it does answer something. Where it's not just a random guy on the beach. It's like hello.
Well, the other thing, too, also that's so interesting is that Christian is portrayed by John Terry, who was one of, I believe, 7 actors who portrayed Felix Leiter, who was James Bond's American compatriot throughout the course of the James Bond series. So as a Bond fan yourself, obviously, that's a little bit of...
I don't remember. There's a lot of those old Bond movies.
There's a lot of those old Bond movies. If I'm not mistaken, John Terry only appeared in, I think, 1 or 2, and I want to say it was either the Dalton or the Brosnan movies. I got to check. But, the thing about it is that up until Jeffrey Wright appeared in the Daniel Craig movies, Felix Leiter, the character, always had, such an exaggerated American accent, probably because, Bond is the most mainstream British show. So, for once, the way that American movies love to have over-exaggerated accents and everything, the Brits were like, oh, now we can do our own version of an exaggerated American accent. And John Terry was one of many actors to fill in there. But here, it's really interesting how, again, even in the flashbacks when it's, still Jack interacting with him, it's he plays this very spectral, very, he has this very overhanging presence in Jack's life. Obviously, he comes off as menacing and sinister. Obviously, it's revealed later on he was a relentless alcoholic, performed multiple surgeries while drunk. Obviously, things are going to get into more detail as we know going forward. And obviously, the flashbacks reveal that Jack flew to Australia in order to get his dad's body. That was kind of him, his way of making peace with his dad, who clearly caused him a lot of trauma and a lot of angst. Over the years, obviously there was a rift between them that was never resolved. We're gonna find that out over the course of the show. I don't remember if we discovered the source of the rift in this season or in following seasons, but that will eventually be revealed. On the island, Jack talks with Kate. He blames himself, says that he didn't try to save the drowning victim. Sees his dad again standing in the water. Kate asks when the last time he slept was, because at first everybody assumes that it's a hallucination, that he's simply sleep deprived like the rest of them. Couple side moments. Michael catches Walt gargling with salt water. Sun tells Jin that she thinks no one is coming to save them and that they should try communicating with the others. Shannon tries bartering with Sawyer for sunscreen. And then Claire talks with Kate, trying to get her star sign more bonding. Hurley tells Jack they're running low on water, and Charlie and Hurley try to urge Jack to come up with a way to divvy up the water, and Jack refuses. He's like, stop trying to make me a leader. Cut to flashback with young Jack talking to Christian, who asks him why he got beat up. Christian tells Jack not to be a hero because then everyone will be mad at him because he doesn't have what it takes. The idea being that if you set everybody's expectations so high, then when you let them down, inevitably, because you're human, that's not going to bode well for you, ultimately. And I hear what Christian is saying. I do. But at the same time, it's also like, okay, this is clearly coming from a very selfish person who is trying to instill this almost like survivalist mentality, if you will, in his son. And in hindsight, it couldn't be more damaging, honestly, because as we see the effects that it has on Jack going forward. Back in the present, Boone argues with Jack about whether he should have tried to save the drowning victim. Jack sees Christian again, follows him into the jungle. Flashback, Jack is told by his mom that his father's gone and that he needs to bring him back and that he's in Australia. And of course, his mom, and I'll say this is probably the only network TV moment of a show that for the most part breaks a lot of network TV tropes and tricks that I usually can't stand. His mom says that Christian was right about him. Jack doesn't have what it takes, and then eventually begs him to go, and then he's like, fine, I'll go. Back in the present, Claire faints. Kate tells Charlie to get water. Charlie finds that it's gone. It's been taken. Kate tells Saeed and Locke. Locke volunteers to go into the jungle and find some water. Jack continues to pursue Christian throughout the jungle. Then in another flashback in Australia, Jack learns that his dad is not in his motel room, or his hotel room rather, and cannot be found. In the present, Jack finds his dad in the jungle, but he keeps disappearing and reappearing. Jack trips, almost falls off a cliff into a ravine, is pulled up by Locke. Back at the camp, Charlie gives Claire some water. Now, this is the section that I want to talk about as well, where you start to have some establishments, the beginning of relationships that'll go on for the rest of the show. Those start to really get established here. The two big ones, I would say. Charlie and Claire, obviously, are our big one, obviously, because those two end up eventually forming a romantic relationship. And the big one, Jack and Locke, obviously, because we talked about it last episode when Chris was on. Chris talking about the dueling ideologies of Jack and Locke as the man of science versus the man of faith. And how it's very interesting, the conversation, how it goes between the two of them, where Locke is like, okay, so if you were to diagnose me with what you're experiencing right now, you would say that I'm hallucinating, And so I would say that it's a hallucination, and yet it's real, And yet it's real. Like, the island is clearly trying to tell you something. Like, this interaction, it's fantastic. It's already one of the best of the show. Already, once again, establishing kind of what the island is, the dual and dichotomies of the characters, how it's going to affect them, how it's going to give them some insight into, themselves really going forward. I mean, what did you think of this conversation?
Yeah, I figured this is kind of laying the breadcrumbs for what's going to follow. There was one line I appreciated from Locke's like crazy people don't know that they're crazy. It's like, okay, like that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's just to seeing if there's gonna be like a kind of rivalry between them even. So I'm excited to see this dynamic develop.
Well, what's so interesting too about the fact of, it's funny that you mentioned whether there'll be a rivalry that develops is the fact that in a way, like, this is the beginning of it in the sense of where Locke is coming at it from a place of like trying to help. He understands, he can clearly see that Jack is in visible pain, honestly. Literally considering the fact that he rescued him from falling off a cliff. So, it is so interesting to me how it's almost like there's a lack of explanation that comes from being Locke, where Locke is like, I have to believe because I cannot physically and verbally intuit what it is that I'm experiencing. Everybody kind of has to go through this experience through by themselves. And that's obviously in such dueling opposition to Jack, who like needs to have some sort of an explanation for everything. He needs to understand. It's part of what's driving him through the jungle is the fact that he needs to have this understanding. He needs to know what is happening. He needs to know why he's seeing his father. As he tells Locke, again, they try to build it up, the twist in the sense of where very similar to the way that they revealed Locke's paralysis prior to the flight in the last episode. They're trying to build up and reveal as well that what's it called, that that Christian is dead, that Jack is seeing a dead man walking through the jungle. But I don't necessarily know if it works as well. If I had one nitpick for this episode, it would be that, because again, it's pretty easy to figure out early on just with the hints that Christian is dead. And then they obviously reveal it at the end of the episode when Jack, is brought in to identify his body. But it's kind of a similar vein in the sense of where Locke is telling him, Locke obviously hasn't told anybody, and for understandably so, because how would he be able to explain it that he was paralyzed before the flight? So it's kind of one of those things where, again, it's like we all need to kind of go through these journeys and discover this, what it is that we're missing on our own, and that's kind of part of what he's telling Jack, as part of also, the Alice in Wonderland speech that he gives him. It's again, follow the white rabbit down the rabbit hole because you don't know what you're going to find. Obviously getting very Lewis Carroll-esque. Back on the beach, Saeed tries to ask Sun and Jin where they got water. A little hint for next episode in that Saeed knows that Sun is pretending to not understand him. He knows that Sun can can understand him. And obviously then Jin gets in the middle and reveals that he got the water from Sawyer. And so naturally, of course, Kate and Saeed are like, well, Sawyer's up to no good again. We got to do something here. They follow him to his secret stash that he's hidden of stuff that he's scavenged from the plane. And of course, naturally, at an assumption, this is going to happen a lot frequently where Sawyer's like, yeah, you guys all want to make me out to be this bad guy, but I'm just trying to survive just like the rest of you. And I didn't steal your water. I traded it for one of his fish, for one of Jin's fish, because, we did it old caveman style. So
I'm definitely coming around on Sawyer. So
yeah.
As like not a villain, but just like the
He's the Shane of the group ultimately, and while Shane from Walking Dead, John Bernthal's character from early on in The Walking Dead, and while obviously he was revealed to be not so great a guy, it's another classic example of he's the one character who is like kind of reminding everybody the situation that they're in, where everybody else is still kind of a little bit in this waiting to be rescued mentality, but Sawyer's immediately transitioned into survivalist mode, and obviously we also have the beginnings of like the him and Kate relationship that's going to eventually kick in the later seasons. But again, right now it's just playful. And what's it called?
I think you definitely need to watch The 100 at some point.
From what I've heard, The 100 is like the most blatant Lost ripoff. It's like that one and then that Manifest show that I think was on ABC and then got canceled after like one season. Those are like the two.
I know it's based on books, but it has a very Lost feel to it. At least the first season, I think.
Yeah. So then we have another flashback. Jack is brought to the morgue where he discovers his father's body. What's it called? His father having suffered a massive heart attack due to drinking. Jack breaks down upon identifying the body. Back in the present, it's nighttime. Jack's sitting by a campfire. He hears rustling in the woods along with ice clinking in a glass. That's the other thing the island is notorious for. The island is notorious for, having little sound effects in the background that remind characters of ones that they've lost, pun intended. So He eventually discovers a water runoff. So again, the whole kind of real world survivalist element. The fact that they needed water because they were running low, and he discovers a water runoff. He also discovers more plane wreckage, several ornate dolls, and discovers his father's coffin ultimately. So he realizes that that's where his dad was leading him to. And the last flashback we have is at the airport. The desk attendant is arguing and will not allow Jack to bring his father's body on the plane. But you can finally see that Jack's starting to click in to leader mode, and it starts right at that desk. And you can obviously see it kind of perturbed and annoyed Jin, a couple people behind him, where Jack is like, "Look, I need to get my father's body back to L.A. and because the funeral, all the funeral arrangements are waiting for him, And he's like, there's no reason why the proper documentation should prevent me from getting on the plane. We don't want to obviously see the fallout from that, but we don't need to because it fulfills the emotional beats. Because back at the present, it's revealed that Boone actually was the one who stole the water, not Sawyer like everybody else did. And I like how they're doing that, where it's like, oh, Boone is kind of has been trying to kind of classify himself as the low-key leader of the of the survivors, really since the crash, since the pilot. But but to quote one Christian Shepherd itself, he doesn't have what it takes. As Jack comes back and is literally like, yeah, Boone was out there trying to save someone. He's been trying to look out for people since we first got here, and now you're going to crucify him, ultimately. He's like, we have to stop acting like we're in survivalist rescue mode. We need to start, contributing and helping each other out and figuring out how to survive, ultimately, until we can figure out some way off this island, even if that, So again, the arc has kind of been fulfilled. He's kind of assumed the role that everybody else kind of prescribed to him. And with another brief montage of everybody, working to survive. And Kate sits Jack and is like, and asks what he was doing out in the jungle. Jack is like, yeah, I don't think we're at that point in our relationship yet, but well, in due time. And the only thing
chasing ghosts.
Quite
literally.
Literally. But the only thing that he says is he's like, yeah, my dad died. And I'm not quite over it yet, but I think I'm getting there ultimately. So that's pretty much the recap of White Rabbit. Again, this is an emotional episode, honestly. I was not expecting to get hit like this. It's funny because, again, this is sandwiched in between two crucially important episodes. Walkabout last week, and then we're going to hit House of the Rising Sun next week, which is when we finally get some backstory on Jin and Sun. But this episode, I forgot how important this episode was, just as far as really, really establishing Jack as the leader, ultimately. As the leader, not necessarily as much of the man of science, but possibly as one of the most traumatized. Again, has a lot of daddy issues. Not the only character to have daddy issues, as we'll see going forward, honestly. There's a reason why he bonds with Kate so much. But, yeah, this was an important one, to say the least, and really an emotionally gripping one. Some very, very good dialogue. Some excellent what's it called, back and forth exchanges, some great character moments, between Jack, between Locke. Again, the rest of the survivors have pretty much started to fill in these roles, but I forgot how early on, honestly, we started to see these guys start to kind of, have their turn and eventually start to work towards the characters that they would become, not the characters that we met when they first crashed on the island. So before we move on to Transformers 1, Luke, what are your final thoughts on White Rabbit?
I really enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying my time with the show. Just taking it nice and easy, one episode a week. It's a nice pace. It's my Sunday morning routine. Okay, wake up, watch Lost, bang.
It's perfect.
And it's I guess it's another solid 4-star episode. Like, I don't really have any big complaints yet. Just seeing the characters develop, seeing the island develop a little, and yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This was one of my favorites, to say the least. So we'll be back next week for House of the Rising Sun, which is like as you could probably guess in the title, is the backstory for Jin and Sun. And then, like I said, that'll wrap us for September. And then, like I said, guys, we're gonna keep pumping out new episodes every Sunday morning until we get to the finale. We'll be wrapping with season 1 sometime in the end of January. But in the meantime, for everybody who's still watching us and listening to us, stay tuned for a surprise review on Transformers 1. As you well know, I was taking a little bit of a step back, a little bit of a break from movies after, I would say, a very, very disappointing summer, possibly the most disappointing movie summer that we've had in years. And needless to say, who knew that all it would take would be the month of September to get me back into it? Because I mean, Beetlejuice, solid, fun, entertaining. We've got some solid indie movies that we've dropped. I watched My Old Ass last weekend, and I watched A Different Man this weekend. I didn't get a chance to watch Speak No Evil, but I heard great things about that. And then next week is the double feature to end all double features, Megalopolis and The Wild Robot, another movie, that animated movie that looks to be really good. But here we have possibly the biggest surprise for the year, as you noted, as I noted, an animated Transformers prequel that had not questionable animation, but I was a little bit perturbed by the design from the first trailer. Thought it was going to be a little bit too kiddie, and here we both are now, and we both have kind of proclaimed, along with a lot of people, this might be one of the best movies of the year. An animated Transformers prequel. What universe are we living in? I really don't know when we crossed over, but
I think it might be the best universe at this point. But
it might be.
another animated movie I watched this week. I want to give a shout out to the Latvian cinema industry.
Yes.
A movie called Flow. It's about a cat. No dialogue. I don't know if it's releasing anywhere, but if it is, please go watch it. We're hoping for an Oscar nomination. It's a long shot, but
Is it a short or
anyway,
a full length?
it's a full length, like
All
hour
right.
10, hour 20.
All right.
It's made in Blender, like just anyway, Transformers. I did enjoy Transformers more. I think, like you, I was not impressed with the initial trailer. I thought, oh, I love Transformers, but this is not it. And here I am, a couple months later, realizing that yeah, I do love this franchise. Like, it's really cool when something comes out and reminds you that yes, you are a fan of this. You actually do have a lot of love for this franchise. Like, when a good MCU movie comes out after a bunch of stinkers, like, hey, you used to like this, and this is still good sometimes. So Transformers 1, just, it's completely different from anything I've seen from Transformers. So it's just a wonderful surprise.
I think that's ultimately what really sets us apart and why people are gravitating towards this is the fact that, yes, for a franchise that people seem to be so familiar with, again, this is not like a lesser known, like, smaller franchise. This is a franchise that had 5 hugely successful installments over the course of 10 years, you know, from the late 2000s to the early 2010s. And then obviously we had the Bumblebee spinoff, which was kind of trying to take this away from Michael Bay. Then we had to sit through 3 years of COVID hell before we got it back with Rise of the Beast. But this is different. You know, this is going back. This is fully animated. You know, Josh Cooley, the director of Toy Story 4, has said that he is intentionally trying to emulate the feelings that came from the original Transformers movie when that came out back in '86. You know, and the fact that people forgot how dark that movie is, and that Optimus Prime dies in the first, like, 10-15 minutes of this movie. And while this movie, Transformers 1, is not necessarily the same, I think what can be said about it is it demonstrates and boosts the longevity of the Transformers franchise in the sense of showing that it doesn't have to necessarily be the same tired old Autobots versus Decepticons conflict on Earth. The humans get involved, that we've seen time and time again. And what essentially we have here is a co-opted structure similar to X-Men First Class that serves as an origin story for Optimus Prime and Megatron. And while it changes certain things about their origin, I think the thing that it ultimately gets to is ultimately one of my favorite story structures in the sense of brothers who ultimately fall on opposite sides of the same coin and unfortunately go through this irreparable divide, where this movie essentially follows Optimus and Megatron in their you know, early days as Orion Pax and D16 minor bots who have this unshakable bond, who kind of have this drive to want to discover the true origins of Cybertron and help restore it to its former glory, as well as as well as also having this unshakable faith in the primes and the origin of Cybertron. That's the other thing too. Also, I believe that this is the first major mainstream Transformers movie released in a theaters that actually delves into the origin of Cybertron, which I don't think any of the movies before this have been. Obviously, it's been in all the shows, but I don't think any of the movies before this have actually delved this deep into the Transformers lore. I could be mistaken, but like I said, because the live action movies seem to be so focused on the same tired old conflicts, but this again just shows the power of animation and what they're able to accomplish in this medium, is that they can take these stories in different directions and flesh these characters out. And even though I will admit a lot of my nitpicks come down to the dialogue choices, certain of it, like the movie does feel very intentionally kiddie in the beginning. My God, that animation, holy shit. I thought Across the Spider-Verse was as peak animation as you could get last year. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, I think the dialogue, we can forgive some of the dialogue,
Yes.
you know,
Yes,
like
we can.
it's still the main audience is kids, like much as it was for the live action movies. We have to admit, but Yeah, the animation, absolutely. I'm not gonna go to the level of Spider-Verse, but I think once they get their cogs, they get this like shininess about them. And
Yes.
it's like, oh, that looks real nice.
Not even just
And
that, it's just the fact of it's like, obviously, again, Across the Spider-Verse and this movie are doing different things. Across the Spider-Verse is still primarily, experimenting around with mixing hand-drawn and 3D animation versus this one is still very much about, like, pushing CG animation and making it more realistic. But I was looking at this and I'm like, this is, besides just being absolutely beautiful and visually appealing, like, the Iacon 5000 race that happens in the beginning, I'm like, this, like, makes Ready Player One look like absolute dog shit in terms of its...
everything flows really nicely.
Yes.
Like they transform very like quickly, just like bang, like whoop, whoop, whoop. So
Yeah.
it's just very satisfying, shiny. Not Nickelodeon original movie,
No,
like some were
definitely not.
saying when the first trailer came out. I don't know
Yeah.
what they did, but it
Yeah.
just looks amazing on the
It,
big
it
screen.
really does. And the other thing, too, also is, again, one of the biggest criticisms that the Michael Bay movies got is that, again, the transformations were very, because of how intricate and detailed they were and how many moving parts it was in live action, it was difficult for people to kind of process it. But here in animation form, you can see every moving part. And the way that they're able to, like, make the transformations, like, organic to their biology, too. Like, that's the other thing, too, that's the other thing I loved about this movie is this movie incorporated a lot of elements from probably my favorite Transformers show, which is Transformers Prime, which is in the sense of where, again, makes it very grounded, makes the characters very, very human, and again, makes the transformations that, like, we get to understand their lore, their biology, kind of how the cogs work, their origins, their mythology, their structures. Like, this is, again, the most, like the fact that we actually saw, like, Transformer society in a way that we've never seen this in any sort of big screen Transformers.
Only the first 5 minutes of Bumblebee, like, but even then the
And
war
even
has
then,
already broken
the
out.
war's already broken out. You only get a brief snapshot. Yeah, you can make the argument for Dark of the Moon when the arc is first taking off from Cybertron, but again, it's Michael Bay, so everything's flat, everything's gray. None of the characters really have a lot of, defining characteristics in those early protoforms. But here it's like, you can tell that Josh Cooley is drawing a lot of inspiration from G1, and it shows. And it's the love and the adoration that he puts towards each of the characters. For the voiceover, that's where, again, it really is, you have to go, like, piece by piece with certain characters. I will say that for me, Keegan-Michael Key does not work because I feel like ever since he left Key and Peele, he's just been overhyped and overput and everything. You also have a very, very entertaining bit where they cast Steve Buscemi as Starscream when he shows up later on in the movie.
He's so good at Starscream.
I thought that was hilarious and just such perfect casting, especially when they do the bit where they show, like, Megatron crushing his voice box, and that's what leads to, like, the high-pitched whine that we know Starscream for having so well. So I thought that was perfect casting. But for me, obviously, again, the standouts, what's it called? Obviously, Brian Tyree Henry as Megatron is one that, especially when we get to the end, like when they become Optimus and Megatron, I thought was perfect, was absolutely perfect. And then obviously when at the end, when you see the final switch happen, and you see, like, D16 is, like, completed his transformation into Megatron, and he starts making the grandiose Megatron speeches that we know from the original G1. Again, I love that stuff. That stuff was like catnip to me. But for me, the surprise was Hemsworth as Optimus, and how, again, you really see him go through the transformation where, again, he's kind of goofy, he's kind of nonsensical, and you're kind of like, this goof is going to become Optimus Prime, but you kind of, like, buy it as he goes on the journey throughout it. By the end, when he becomes, obviously from when he becomes, like, Orion Pax, and then when he gets the Matrix of Leadership at the end, it becomes Optimus Prime. And I mean, I'm geeking out so hard. Sorry, because you know how much I love this shit. But, like, when he goes into the Cybertron core and then you see the spirit of the 13 Primes, they give him the Matrix of Leadership, and it's like, arise. I was fighting so hard to, like, fist bump. I'm like, let's
absolutely,
go.
because people, whoever saw this, like, earlier a fan screen where said that this has a Spider-Verse What's Up Danger like moment.
Yes,
I was like waiting for it. Okay, when is it? I was like, okay, here it comes.
Here it comes. Oh, it's so good.
And he gets his final upgraded form. I'm like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. Like,
yes, yeah.
It reminds me of, like, I love being a nerd who likes these robots.
Yes, this is a movie that rewards nerdom. Every time people online are complaining and Hollywood's like, oh, well, what do you want? This is what we want. We want shit that rewards our viewing time as nerds, but also, again, it's not just that it rewards our viewing time with endless amounts of fan service. It's that the writing and the character work is there. It's so, like, you told me this when you had first watched this movie. You were like, it's insane to me that an animated Transformers movie is what has everything in it that seems to be missing from movies now. And honestly, after watching it, like, again, I was just blown away because the character work is so well done. So well done. And the plotting, I should probably, mention something about the plot, which is where essentially what happens is that, like I mentioned before, Orion Pax and Megatron, but as he's known as D16, are minor bots who are trying to make a better life for themselves, and through a series of events, they discover a message from one of the 13 Primes, Alpha Trion, that leads them on a quest to the surface where they discover a massive betrayal that has happened in terms of the governance of Icon, which is currently being run by Sentinel Prime, who, it's safe to say that, like, now, this is the third time across different mediums where Sentinel Prime has proved to be not exactly trustworthy, first in Transformers Animated, then in Transformers Dark of the Moon, and now this.
As soon as I saw him, I'm like, oh. This guy again.
For me, the minute that I see that he's voiced by John Hamm, of all people, who people seem to, who Hollywood has seemed determined to make like the new ultimate bad guy and everything, but just saw last year in all the TV appearances he was in, Morning Show season 3, Fargo season 5, now in the new Taylor Sheridan Paramount show that's coming out, Landman. It's like, oh, every time I see John Hamm in something now, I just expect that he's going to be a bad guy ultimately. Like the days of Don Draper are ultimately long behind him. And honestly, like, again, it's again, credit where credit is due. The fact that it uses ultimately a very predictable plot structure, but again, due to again just how good the writing is, we don't necessarily see it coming until it happens. And obviously, again, I mean, I still remember last year when I first mentioned this movie, we were talking about Rise of the Beast, and I mentioned the cast, and you were like, oh, aside from the cast, I don't know how well this is going to do. And now here we are, a year and a couple months later, and it's like, yeah, this is one of the best movies that came out this year. I think it's safe to say.
I think it just goes to show, like, what a shit year it's been. Like, we have to be blunt about it. Like, this is my top 5. Like, how? I think like, there's still movies I need to watch, but
I still have to figure it out. But I think this might be in my top 5 too. I really do. I had a really good time with this one. Also the fact that, again, we get Lawrence Fishburne as Alpha Trion, which I'm like, already, like, that Alpha Trion is probably iconic. 13 Primes, possibly the only iconic Megatron from the Fallen in Transformers lore established that Megatron is D16. He takes his name, and again, like, all the little pieces that were there as far as establishing D16 as the Magneto, where he's like, he's the one that is idolizing Sentinel. He's the one that's like, Sentinel is going to lead us to victory. And then when he discovers scientific betrayal, and it kind of sends him down this dark path to the Brian is like, are we good? And he's like, I'm going to fucking kill Sentinel. It's the last thing that I do. And then they'll drill the Decepticon side into him, and then to the point where he literally blasts a hole through Optimus in order to get Sentinel, but then before ripping Sentinel in half and see of the Decepticons. Oh, great stuff. It's great stuff. I absolutely loved it. This better get sequels. This better get sequels because, oh man, I want to see the continued conflict with the Quintessons. I want to see the beginning of the Cybertronian War. If this is going to lead to us finally getting the Fall of Cybertron movie that I've wanted for years since that video game happened, oh, I'm so down for it. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it's basically what Chris and I have been talking about ever since we covered the anime Transformer show that Netflix did, what's it called? Years ago, when that dropped on Netflix during COVID, which is where we don't need any more human characters. We just need the Transformers have established themselves as interesting enough characters. And even though this one slated itself as an animated kids movie, I gotta say, for a kids movie, this was not afraid to go dark. This is not afraid to go dark. This is not afraid to have some more intense storytelling. Like, there's a lot of robot deaths in this one that are not, like, they're not pretty, And
I mean, all the good kids movies have a little bit of dark in them. Just to go back briefly to that origin part of them, like in the live action movies, that's really all I've seen. You know me, I only watch the big movies.
Yes.
We only get like, Optimus and Megatron. They don't like each other very much, or they had beef a long time ago.
But even laced in the Michael Bay movies, there was always the line of, it's like, oh, we used to be brothers.
Yeah. But to get a whole movie of that is just just so
Yes.
satisfying.
Yes, it is. And it's not satisfying, not only satisfying in the sense of where it's so specific to a certain niche, it's satisfying in a broad sense because everybody understands that, again, like some of my favorite, X-Men First Class, Wicked, the idea of like people who love each other so much, but because they fall on such different sides ideologically, I don't know what it is, if it's just how good X-Men First Class did that, and the fact that this is very much following in the vein of that, but there is something so simultaneously heartbreaking but satisfying about seeing kind of the simultaneous villain and origin stories and how they ultimately want the same thing, but have such different ways of going about it. And ultimately, where is one more morally better than the other? We don't necessarily know. But the fact that it has all those juicy little morally gray areas. Again, you saw it in X-Men First Class. You're going to see it in Wicked. Unfortunately, even though Wicked's going to screw it up because that movie's going to be terrible. But in the original stage production of Wicked, exact same thing, where Elphaba and Glinda ultimately discovered the wizard's corruption, and Elphaba's like, I'm going to do something about it. And ultimately, if this is going to make me deemed wicked, then so be it, ultimately, And it's kind of the same thing with Megatron here. If there's one from Transformers 1 that I do have, it's that make stories like this. Make more stories about, honestly, Arcane. You can make the same argument, too. And Jinx,
I'm going to watch Arcane
you have to.
this year before the
It's
season
the best
2.
thing that Netflix has ever made. Netflix has never made anything that's better than it. It's better than BoJack Horseman. Yeah, I said that.
Well, I haven't seen that one either. So.
Well, that's another one that you got to catch up on. Like I said, I'm gonna turn you into a TV fan if it kills me or if it kills me.
I'm open to it.
Yeah, especially since it's been clear for years, but obviously now it's obvious more than ever that the better writing is just on It's just on TV as opposed to movies. But if there is one Transformers like show property that I would recommend as well, it's definitely watch Transformers Prime, because a lot of the seeds from this movie can also be found in that TV show as well. In addition to the fact that this movie also borrows several music cues from Transformers Prime as well, which I was like actually very surprised. I was listening for like the bits from like the Bay verse that they put into Transformers Rise of the Beast last year, and that was there. But I was listening, I'm like, oh shit, there's some Transformers Prime needle drops in here. Okay, I hear this. This movie was phenomenal. I could not recommend this more. We really, this has probably been one of the best Septembers that we've had in a long, long time. I've actually been really happy with the selection of movies that we've had so far this month. It has certainly surprised me and impressed me, to say the least. So with that being said, Luke, your final thoughts and star rating for Transformers 1.
As someone who grew up with the Bay movies, having seen Age of Extinction in theaters, that being a very core memory of mine, this is absolutely everything that I didn't know I needed in my life, but apparently I do. And if you like Megatron with a big gun on his hand, I was hoping he would turn into the gun at some point, just a pistol. But it's fantastic. It's easy 4.5 stars for me.
Yeah, I agree. I want to give this a 5 so badly, but there were certain elements in the beginning, like certain really kiddie elements that kind of held it back. But again, the visuals, the voiceover, the storytelling, the lore. Again, as a diehard Transformers fan, I can safely say that Transformers is probably the last movie franchise that has not let me down yet so far. Even Bumblebee, even as annoyed as I was by that movie, still had a lot of great, awesome moments in it. And even Rise of the Beasts, as problematic as that was, gave me, the live action Maximals, Maximals, which I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But Transformers 1 again, and continuing to show that this franchise is not a one-trick pony. This franchise is not married to Michael Bay. This is, without a doubt, one of the best movies of the year. We'll see, obviously, once Wild Robot comes out next year. But for me already, this is the best animated movie that I've seen all year, without question. Easy 4.5. Man, I'm so tempted to give this 5 stars, but inherently I know I can't. But this is really good. This is really, really, really good stuff. So with that being said, that was myself. That was Luke. Our latest episode of Talkin' Lost that eventually delved into a Transformers 1. What's it called? Praise, adoration, what have you. We'll be back next week for House of the Rising Sun, and then I will also be doing my Megalopolis and Wild Robot reviews, so stay tuned for that as we wrap up September, and kind of this, guys, will give you a brief overview as far as what the fall is going to look like. Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can check out my back catalog of videos at Luke Reviews on YouTube, and the ever so slightly posts on Instagram as well. But, these are my favorite episodes, when we just both really like something.
Yes. I mean,
it's just fantastic.
It always makes for the best podcasting, is when people actually like something. It's kind of insane, amazing if it would be if Hollywood actually, started to make more stuff that we actually like. But albeit wishful thinking. You guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin TV Podcast across all platforms. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. And in this case, TV shows. We'll see you guys.